Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. Destiny, is the volume okay?
Mm-hmm.
Everything sounds good. Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. I always think that it would be fantastic if webinars had laugh tracks so that you could engage with your audience, but of course they don't. So you could just ask any questions you might have on the side, and we'll get to them during the presentation. I'd love for your participation. So I'd like to start out with the fact that marketing is all around us, from your first memories to the moment before you decide to join this webinar. You've been inundated by marketing and the power of suggestion. You spend your time and hard-earned money in response to what marketers say is cool and hip and appropriate for your age, profession, and socioeconomic status. But I really love this one saying that Andy Warhol coined in the mid-1970s, which happens to be when I was born, so a little bit revealing. And I think he was really on to something that we are just now starting to see come to fruition. And it's the idea of the culture of now. And what's resonating with us today, I think, is important to examine. If we're going to truly understand when and how certain people, images, and brands impact us on a daily basis, that's going to be hugely important to our association, hugely important to our organizations. And I've always loved this expression, like a fish who doesn't understand the water. We fail to see what's happening and don't notice what's changing around us. That was some wise words by Seth Godin. But the point is I believe it's the time to do something else with the power of suggestion, with the power of marketing. It's time to serve our association members and really bring about change. So today, that's what we're going to examine. We're going to examine how exactly you're supposed to do that through social psychology, story formulas, and a little bit of grit. So let's jump right in. I'd like to ask one very broad question, which is the idea of why do certain suggestions, certain ideas get through to us and others don't? Whether you're trying to convince your child or your boss or your peer that your idea is valid, the power of suggestion is an incredible tool in doing that. I just think about the fact that why are some memories so salient? We remember events that happened 20 years ago like it was yesterday. And I believe the power of suggestion is really a part of that. For instance, when I first opened my business, I was super nervous, to be honest. And, I had spent a career in corporate America, working on Madison Avenue, and I had a nice, stable corner office job. And my husband is totally fiscally conservative. He's an engineer. He has an MBA. And I remember just quitting my job and coming home and starting my own agency. And I was like, hey, started an agency, hun. It's called Epic. What do you think? And he was like, wait, how are you going to make money? How is this all going to work out? It's a recession. Are you crazy? What are you doing? And I just knew it was the right time for me. I always had that entrepreneurial spirit, and I come from a long line of entrepreneurs, but I was nervous. And I didn't have the most perfect timing either. I actually opened my business on the heels of what, people coined the Great Recession, which probably wasn't great either. And my first client was a luxury brand. So then I'm like, great. People at this point were shaming people for carrying Louis Vuitton bags on the street. So again, timing not perfect, but I persisted. So my first client, and Destiny, if we can just go to the next slide, it'd be awesome. My first client, let's go to the next one after that, was Georgetown Cupcake. And they were a brand new cupcake shop just launched in Washington, D.C. And they were my, one of my absolute first clients. And so I needed them to succeed just to prove to my husband that I was going to be able to make money and make a living at this. So I knew they had to make it. So when they came to me and they were like, we just launched this shop, and, my success was riding on their success. So I took them through what, a lot of marketers on this call will know as the so what test. And that's a test where we try to figure out what really makes a brand interesting, unique, some brand that we would proselytize or talk about. what makes them interesting? And I took them through the SOWET test. So I said, what's interesting about you? And they said, well, we're two sisters who left a career in finance and fashion to start a business. And I'm like, so what? And they were like, we have the most delicious cupcakes ever. And I'm like, oh, so what? Isn't that a precursor for having a cupcake shop? And then they were like, well, our cupcakes are $4 each. And I'm like, well, that's a deterrent. So let's not focus on that. And then they said, we actually sell out our cupcakes every day and we can't make them fast enough. And at the time, they had this really small shop on the corner in Georgetown. And I was like, well, that's interesting. The fact that you sell out every day and you can't make enough, cupcakes. So what I would say is, I said to the girls, I said, all right, let's focus on the fact that you have this line. Because I think the line in itself is interesting. You're a new business, but you have a line around the block. So let's push out the countertop and make your line go out even further. So then we can pitch the media about the fact that people have to stand in line for your cupcake. And if we can just go to the next slide, what I realized was people don't want to wait in line for a stuck-up condescending cupcake. They want to wait in line for a cupcake other people are willing to wait in line. And again, it's this concept of the power of suggestion. It's just like if you go to a restaurant and no one's there, we're all a little panicked, right? Like it's the same kind of thing when it comes to food shops. And so even now, today, which is probably 12 years later, they have a line out and around the door, and everybody still talks about the line. It's one of the main things about their brand that really makes them interesting. So I know you guys aren't luxury cupcakes, right? Associations aren't luxury cupcakes, but if we went through this kind of a test with you, we could find what those interesting things are. And what's fascinating about that is they're usually in stories or ideas that come from members, concepts that are like right at the tip of your fingertips, but you might need someone else to come in and just help you like uncover them and unearth them. So again, another positive story about the power of suggestion, if we can just go to the next slide. I was the first in my immediate family to graduate from college. And I had no idea how to get an internship. And I was just absolutely clueless when I was in college. And so, I actually think that was a benefit to me because I sought out an internship at George Magazine, not knowing anybody at the magazine. I just interviewed their editor-in-chief. And I said, okay, now that I know so much about your magazine, how about an internship? And just that suggestion that I knew more than maybe other people who were applying for the job, he actually gave me the job. So I'm there late one night and it's like, super late and I'm working hard. It's 8:00 and I hear this like booming voice from around the corner come around and say, Adele. And I was so excited because it was John F. Kennedy Jr. And he was asking me if I wanted to go to a Knicks game because he heard that I was like the hardest working intern at the magazine and he wanted to reward me. So again, that's how the power of suggestion worked for me because other people in the office had seen me working really hard, had seen me doing, the best that I could. And they suggested to John that he should do something nice for me. So, that is my claim to fame. I actually did have a few conversations with him, so super excited about that. If we could just go to the next slide, and the one after that. So I actually did wind up going to a Knicks game, and my seats were like right behind Spike Lee. So I thought I was so cool at the time, but this is when the Knicks actually were good. They were winning games. But it was a great opportunity because I was influential because of the power of suggestion. Now, not everything, can work that well. If we can just go to the next slide. My mom and I have a very close relationship. And when I was in high school, and I promise this is going to be relevant to you guys, promise. I was madly in love with this guy. And I just felt absolutely head over heels, and I thought he was great. And, guys, this is the early 90s, so forgive the hair on the next page. But at at the time, I really wanted to wear this necklace that was like Tom, Two Hearts, Adele. And my mom was like, you will not know this guy in a few years. So, don't wear the necklace. You shouldn't really wear the necklace. I want you guys to squint a little bit. You'll see that like monstrosity of a necklace in the picture. And so that was kind of embarrassing. And it's now, a guy that my mom wound up finding out he was cheating on me. So it was like the worst John Hughes movie kind of situation. Horrible. Power of suggestion can work for you and it can work against you. So, it's just keep that in mind, right? Everything will not come out totally roses if you use the power of suggestion, but I'm going to show you how to use it in your career and your association. You can convince people to join, to be a part of what it is you guys do. And but there are some little things that you have to be aware of. So I want to talk about a little bit about the fact that sometimes it takes someone else's perspective to suggest something to you to really make an impact. And so right around this time and right after I worked at George Magazine, I got an amazing opportunity to work in the Twin Towers in Manhattan. And it was a high floor. And I remember being so excited about the job offer. And I called my mom up and I was like, Mom, I'm so excited. I'm going to get this job. And it was right before September 11th. And my mom was like, you know what? I just have a really bad feeling about it. I don't think you should take the job. And I didn't, because I listened to my mom's power of suggestion. And it's pretty scary to think that, that it was that powerful at that point in my life that I could have been in one of the towers on September 11th. But my mom said this to me, and for some reason I heeded her warning and I didn't take the job. I took some other job that was more midtown. So I was super lucky, and I've never forgotten that. And I think that that's why this topic specifically really speaks to me, because I think there are so many things in our life and in our profession where somebody will say something to you, it'll be flippant, it'll be a comment, and you'll think it won't mean anything, but that meant everything. So the power of suggestion is really, really huge. So I want to talk a little bit about what this means to you and how you can use this for your association. If we can just go to the next slide and the one after that. Thank you. So I think what's so important about you being able to suggest the right kinds of things at work and being able to influence your peers and the people that you work with is to be able to be likable, right? I think people want to see you be likable. And they won't listen to your suggestions if you don't come across with some level of transparency, some level of vulnerability. And this is where I think even if you could suggest some kind of vulnerability, it doesn't have to be anything, really deep, but it could be something that, you want to let people know some level of vulnerability that you have, or it could be, hey, I really appreciate you taking notes for me. It's one of those things where I, appreciate somebody doing that because it helps me really stay organized. And so as a leader, or as someone who's leading a team, it's so important for you to be likable and to be vulnerable. And when you are vulnerable, you'll be more open to suggestions around you, to what people think might be the right path for you to take. And so I think that that's how it really matters in what we're doing from an everyday standpoint. You really want to be the person who is likable. And one of the things that social psychologists talk about in being likable is the ability to tell good stories. The ability to be a good storyteller, to suggest different things through stories is a huge advantage for leaders, because people don't necessarily want to be told what to do, because if they feel like the idea is yours, they're not going to implement it. It's not going to be as it's not going to be as exciting for them. if they feel the idea is their own or something they came up with as something you suggested, it really does help you get more compliance from your team on a regular basis. So we can just move on. So I want to ask this question about conforming to social norms, because if we all want to be liked, and we all want to make sure that other people like us, we may not suggest an idea that may hurt someone's feelings because we all want to be liked. So the question I have for you guys is, when we get older, do we feel more or less pressure to conform with social norms? What do you guys think? More or less? Just type in your little answers. The answer, okay. We got a couple of options. Everybody's saying less. All right. Constant struggle. I love some of these responses. You know what? It actually is more. Believe it or not, we want to conform more as we get older because, all of us right now, we all go down the street and we all have our business casual on and we all look our part in what we're supposed to look as far as social norms. And we start to feel self-conscious as early as age 5. If we can just move to the next slide. Here's a picture of my 2 kids at Wegmans driving their little car. But 5 years old, we start to feel self-conscious. And so this idea that we're going to share a story or a vulnerability, online or about someone else is something that's really, really scary to us. And so this idea of suggesting something that might not be something somebody's comfortable with is just something that all of us take pretty seriously, I think. And so we're scared of it. So how do you get people to open up? How do you get them to give you the suggestions? Because there is gold in your associations and in your organizations in what other people think, is really something you should be doing. And oftentimes people just feel too self-conscious to give us those ideas, even though they know what the right ones are. So we can move on to the next slide. In a journal by the Consumer Psychology Association, they said 98% of people are scared or afraid to recommend a person, brand, or product on social media because that's how afraid we are about what people think. 2% of people are willing to kind of put their necks out and recommend a brand. So what are the kinds of things, so if that's true, right, and we have that, that much odds against us as far as people promoting our brand, what makes people share certain things? So if we can go to the next slide, and the next one after that, I'm sorry. What makes us share things? Well, I'm sorry, after that. And one more. Okay, so why do people share things online? I think, a lot of it is we want to share things online that are consistent with our own personal narrative, right? So, I want to be funny. So, I aspire to be somewhat funny. And I think this particular meme is hilarious. This is a little ditty and Jack and Diane. Think about that, right? It's the song. It's so funny. It's so silly. And of course, I wanted to share it on my social media platforms because I wanted people to think I'm funny and clever and all that good stuff. So it's a meme that really spoke to me and said something about me. But what content that you put out represents how people want to be seen in your profession, in your industry. And when you're developing content, you should be thinking on that level. It should be that in depth, meaning why would somebody want to share this with us, with their context? Why would somebody want to share what we're putting out as an association with others around them? It's one of the reasons why award programs are still so incredibly popular. It's because everybody wants to share when they get an award. Everyone wants to share when they've won an accolade. And so associations can really benefit from creating content that is shareable for people within their organizations, people within their professions, and so on and so forth. So we all really want to be liked. What we want to do as an association is really create likable content that matches what people want to be perceived as a member of your association. Okay, next slide. Being a good storyteller is really a smart leadership skill to have. And you have to be a good storyteller in order to get people to believe in your vision and your ideas. And, you know, many times we kind of forget about this as, you know, as associations. We want to get things out about our industry. We want to get things out about our product or our service. And we forget about the fact that people just really want stories. And I think associations have so many amazing stories, whether it's a member who had a life-changing, you know, event happen, whether it's someone who joined your board and as a result they got the breakthrough client they always wanted, where, you know, there's just so many amazing stories, and yet we still focus on the fact that our annual conference is coming up, right? And promoting that and pushing that through, instead of really focusing on the story behind why people should come. Why should people, you know, join your association? Why should they be a part of what you have to offer? And I think we get lost in the details and don't tell really compelling stories. So if you think about it, everything, truly everything we do, from faith, science to love, needs a story for people to find it plausible, right? No story, no sale. It's really, really that simple. No story, no sale. And, you know, this applies to associations. Associations have so many great stories. Now, you might have some negative stories, right, that you don't want people to know about, but, you know, that's for another webinar. But the point is that you guys have really, really excellent stories that you can dig up. And it's just a matter of, you know, kind of mining for them. Do you have someone dedicated to just going around at your annual conference or calling members up and asking them, what's been your experience with the association? How's it working? What has happened that, you know, that has maybe been transformative for you, either through the profession or the industry? So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of those formulas and how to create really, really good stories, because it's crucially important for you to continue to tell stories. In today's super crowded marketplace, one of the ways to stand out is to have an amazing story. So if we can go to the next slide. So I want to give you 5 key story formulas. And these are things to write down and to think about and to research. And to really consider what your stories are within your organization and how you can tell them in a really interesting way. We can go to the next slide, please. Awesome. So this is Joseph Campbell. He's a very, very famous person who came up with what's called the hero's journey. And if this is something you haven't seen, you would recognize it because this is the type of story that we've seen over and over and over again in movies, from Star Wars to Matrix to The Lord of the Rings to Harry Potter. They all have these different elements of story. And essentially it's the idea that, you know, an ordinary man or woman goes on an adventure, he or she faces a crisis and returns to the ordinary world transformed as a victor, right? Like, so like think about that in your organization. So what would that look like? Well, let me give you an example. Maybe it's an ordinary accountant, dentist, neuroscientist, you name it, right? Because there's an association for everything. But, you know, they join an association or they come to an event, right? They meet people in the industry and have a conflict with what they thought was true that was actually happening in the profession, and something that they experienced at your association or at an event changed their mind about what was actually happening in the industry or the market. And they became so compelled by it that they became the board president or someone else in your organization, whatever it might be. Then they returned to their ordinary life, to their profession, a changed person because of the experience they had through your association. The point is every single one of you guys on the phone who works for an association has this kind of story that you can unearth and tell in different ways. And this is a structure where you're like, this is so basic. How could this be interesting? This is the basis for almost every story we've ever heard in our lives. From every type of faith or religion, they go through the same journey. So something to look into, this hero's journey. Can we move on? This concept of before, right? Before what you thought was true happened, and now this is the case, right? And so before, after, and here's how we got you there. And the version of the association story is something I participated in. I worked with ASAE, and we did this, annual conference marketing campaign for everybody going to Detroit. And instead of focusing on Detroit as the destination or as the event place, we focused on the fact that everybody was going for different reasons. And everybody had different reasons to go. And it was a really successful viral campaign. We can move on to the next one. Awesome. So the other one is problem, agitate, solve. So a really good example of this type of story is .org. The reason why .org exists is because they felt that there was a gap in the market. They addressed the gap in the market. They talked about it externally, Sherry and Kevin, and then they solved it. Right? And that's why many of you are on these webinars, are part of this community, and continue to be part of this community. The next one, if we can, is about revealing a secret, right? So I revealed a secret to you guys. I said in one of the stories I talked about in the beginning that, I was nervous to start a business. And as an entrepreneur, that shows some level of vulnerability. And then I revealed why I was nervous and how I overcame that challenge. And everybody listens in a little closer when you tell a story, when you tell a secret. Okay? So an example for that is maybe, an example for that in an association is this concept of, someone learned something they didn't know they had. And as a result of coming to your organization, of joining your organization, they found a new truth, and that new truth changed something about who they were. Okay? And the last one is this concept of why. And oh my gosh, guys, we've been hearing about this so often in so many different places. And it's this idea of Simon Sinek's start with why. And what I just want to say about the why is you have to understand your why and what you stand for as an organization. But that's not as important as the why for why people are part of your association, why they join, why what you do matters to them, and being able to respond to them with a concept, to take a stand on something that's important for them is hugely important and makes your marketing most viable to them. You'll never be as relevant as when you stand for something that's important to your members. So I think, Destiny, is that all the time we have?
Yeah, we're just about 2 minutes after, so we can open it up for some questions. I have one just to throw out there. With the storytelling, do you feel that video is the best way to tell the story once you've gathered your formula, the why formula?
I definitely think video is a great medium. I wouldn't say it's the only one, though. And I think everybody out there wants content in different forms and different mediums. So, podcasting, Kiki's association chats, super important, very consistent and very engaging, and that's a podcast. She also puts video with it, but that's a podcast. And so people can listen to it. There's so many different platforms and ways at which you can get your message out there. I think it just really depends on what makes sense for who your members are. So if they're, like someone just wrote, like our members are physicians, so they love podcasts. That makes sense, right? If you're busy, you're just going to put it in your headphones. You might, listen to something in the treadmill so there you can work out and still get, up to speed on what's happening in the profession.
So how do you feel, or how do you measure what people like, I guess?
Yeah, so there's all kinds of really interesting studies, and because we only have a half an hour, I couldn't get it all in. But essentially, there are really fantastic re- there's really fantastic research that talks about what makes people share something. And usually it's because you think you're going to help somebody with some information, you're going to make them laugh, right? So like one of the things that was most shared in the New York Times was an article about the effects of Lyme disease. It was the most popular article in 2018. It was the most shared, most widely read article. It's because people want to help each other. And what's really interesting is associations don't necessarily utilize that to their full advantage. There's so many things associations do that can help people. And I feel like their content is often not focused on that necessarily. Not focused on why people share the content and why people actually move forward. And also things, there's a whole bunch of psychological reasons for why we share content. We think we're going to entertain our friend. We think we're going to, create a movement or show something that relates to us through the content. So that's sort of an interesting take on that.
So we have a question from Aaron, and it's storytelling is not my strong suit. How do I build that skill?
Yeah, so I think, one of the things that you can do is you can join a local Toastmasters group, or, you can look into formulating your stories in advance. I often think that, if storytelling, let's say orally isn't your best skill, maybe you're a better writer. It's really about figuring out the best medium for you to tell your stories, but it's something that you have to hone. I mean, I think people are really under the wrong impression when they think that professional speakers don't hone every single one of those stories that they tell. They tell them over and over and over again. And, sometimes on platforms like this, we try out new materials, or, we're like, okay, we have a captive audience. Let's see what resonates with people, what gets people to talk about. But there's tons and tons of resources. And, as a result of this webinar, I'm happy to send a couple of links and some things that I think could actually be really helpful. So
That would be great. Thank you, Adele. It looks like that's all the questions we have. Just want to make sure I can get your contact information here. There we go. If you'd like to contact Adele personally, this is her contact info right here on the screen. And you also